Hands down, knives down, step off the line. I want every single one of you watching when this hits the bin. The stock pot was 12 quarts of smoked bone broth. The dishwasher had built it on her own break, on her own time, on a single back burner she had been quietly allowed to use the way an old cat is quietly allowed a corner of a room. 47 minutes into Saturday dinner service at one of the most talked-about restaurants in Chicago, the head chef lifted that pot off the flame with both hands and walked it the long way across the kitchen, past every cook, past the sous chef station, past the expo window, all the way to the dish pit at the back wall. He held it there for a beat. He looked at her. He turned it over. The sound it made hitting the bottom of the black slop bin was the sound of 9 hours of work going dark. Smell that, brigade? That is what garbage smells like. Burnt bone, old vegetables, bad judgment. Whoever taught her to cook trash. The dishwasher did not move. She stood with her gloves on and the spray hose in her right hand, and she watched the broth she had built crawl down the inside of the bin in long, slow ribbons. She did not speak. She did not flinch. She reached into the front pocket of her apron and pressed her thumb against a small index card with broth-soaked corners, the way someone might press a thumb against a wedding band they no longer wore on their finger. On the wall above her station, pinned to a corkboard that had not been updated since the restaurant opened, a state of Illinois labor poster hung between an old health inspection certificate and a delivery schedule. She had read every line of that poster during her first week. She would read one of those lines back 6 weeks from this night to a federal investigator with a tape recorder running. Section 203M of the Federal Labor Act. A valid tip pool may include only those employees who customarily and regularly receive tips. An employer may not keep tips received by employees for any purpose. The dishwasher knew that section by heart now, the way she had once known every line of a wine list at a restaurant in New York that no longer existed. She had been in a kitchen like this before, with a different man yelling, with a different pot going into a different drain, and she had walked out of that one too, but not without taking everything with her.
8 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning in late August, the same woman had walked through the same back service door for the first time. The kitchen was quiet then. Prep cooks were peeling onions in slow circles. A radio at the dry storage end of the room was playing something instrumental and forgettable. She wore a plain black t-shirt, dark canvas pants, second-hand kitchen clogs, and her hair pulled back into a tight twist. She carried a small canvas tote with a thermos, a notebook, a packet of clean gloves, and a long object wrapped in dark blue cloth that she did not unwrap for anyone. The hiring manager spent 11 minutes on her application. She had given her name as N. Ellis. She had listed 2 short stints, a bakery in Brooklyn, a fast casual in Queens, and a long gap that she described, when asked, as family. The manager did not ask a second question. He stamped her paperwork, handed her a wristband with her shift assignment, walked her down a narrow service hallway lined with empty wine crates, and pushed open a door into the main kitchen of a restaurant called Lumière, which was, that month, the most discussed opening in the city. "This is Dish. Dish lives back here. You will not go past the herb station unless someone calls you up. You will not touch a pan that is on a flame unless someone hands it to you. You will not speak to the dining room. Are we clear on Dish?" She nodded once. She did not say, "Yes, chef." The manager had not introduced himself as chef, and she had not been a person who handed out that word loosely in a very long time. Her first shift was 11 hours. She washed 2,200 plates, by her own quiet count, between 3 in the afternoon and 2 in the morning. She stacked them when they came back to her, the way she had been taught to stack a long time ago, not by height, but by weight, the heaviest base plates on the bottom of the run, and the small flat tasting saucers laid across the top, so that the stack would not tip when the busser came back at a sprint. The dish pit lead, a quiet, older man from Honduras who had been at 3 highly decorated restaurants in 2 cities and who had not been impressed by anyone in 5 years, noticed it within the first hour and said nothing. He looked at her once, looked at the stack, looked at her again, and went back to scrubbing a sauté pan. He would remember that small detail later when someone asked him under oath who at Lumière had carried herself like a line cook from the very first day. When her shift ended, she walked 4 blocks east, took the Pink Line south, and got off at 18th Street in Pilsen. Her apartment was a single room on the 2nd floor of a brick walk-up. A bed, a folding table, a 2-burner stove, a small refrigerator, a single shelf with 3 cookbooks she had owned since culinary school, and a framed photograph that she kept face down on the windowsill. She did not turn the photograph over that night. She had not turned it over in 8 months. She sat at the folding table at 3 in the morning with the wrapped object from her tote in front of her. She unfolded the cloth 1 corner at a time. Inside was a Japanese chef's knife, an 8-inch gyuto, the earls worn smooth, the blade still sharp. The maker's mark was etched in small characters near the bolster. She did not pick it up. She traced the cloth around it with her thumb and refolded it the way it had been. Then she opened her notebook to a clean page and wrote in small, careful handwriting the date, the address of the restaurant, the name of the dish pit lead, the names of 2 prep cooks she had heard called across the kitchen, the temperature of the walk-in cooler, and 3 short observations about what was wrong with the family meal that night. She closed the notebook. She turned off the lamp. She did not sleep until the sun came up. If you have ever taken a job below your title to survive, hit subscribe and stay with this one. There is a lot more coming.
By the end of her first week, the dishwasher had learned the architecture of the kitchen the way a stranger learns the layout of a city, by walking it at every hour and remembering which streets emptied first. The head chef arrived at 4 in the afternoon, 6 days a week, in a black sedan that pulled up at the alley door. He wore his whites unbuttoned at the top and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he came through the back hallway with a leather knife roll under his arm and a particular kind of voice that the brigade adjusted to before he had finished his first sentence of the day. Family meal in 18 minutes. If I taste salt before I taste anything else, the person who made it cleans the grease trap. Pike with me. He was 41 years old. He had cooked under 2 of the most famous names in modern American fine dining. He had been profiled in 3 magazines that month alone. He kept a tally of how many of his line cooks had cried in his walk-in cooler since the restaurant opened, and he was open about that tally with the press, because the press had not yet decided whether to call it a problem or a temperament. The dishwasher watched him for 4 shifts without speaking. She did not look at him directly. She watched instead the way his sous chef walked behind him at exactly 2 paces, the way the line cooks held their breath when he passed the pass, the way the prep team became quieter as he approached and louder again as he walked away. The sous chef was a different problem. He was 33, French-trained, a graduate of a school in Lyon that he mentioned within 90 seconds of meeting any new hire. He carried a small notebook in his breast pocket in which he had told the brigade more than once he was building a record of everyone's failures for posterity. He walked the line during prep and stopped at the dish station for the first time on her 3rd day. Did anyone tell you what a brunoise actually is, or do you just stand here and watch the rest of us do real work? She wiped the rim of the sink with a clean towel and did not look up. 2-millimeter dice, evenly cut, no broken corners. Textbook. We do not cook by textbook here. We cook by feel. You will learn that or you will not. I do not particularly care which. He walked away from the station with both hands behind his back and told the line, loud enough for her to hear across the kitchen, that the new dish pit hire had been quoting LaRousse at him during prep, and the line cooks laughed because the line cooks were paid to laugh. The front-of-house director appeared at the end of the first week with a fresh stack of color-coded wristbands and a clipboard. She was 36, polished in the same hard, glossy way the dining room itself was polished, smiling at the brigade the way a stage manager smiles at a chorus. She handed white wristbands to the captains, gray wristbands to the food runners, dark green to the line cooks, and at the dish station she handed out a single black wristband with a quiet, careful smile. Back of house, non-guest facing. This is just for our internal tracking. It does not affect your pay. We like to know who is where. The dishwasher took the wristband, snapped it onto her wrist, and said nothing. Across the line, the sous chef looked up in his notebook and made a small mark in it that he did not explain. The head chef did not look up at all. At home that night, she opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote 3 lines: white, gray, green, black. Tip pool eligibility, section 203M. She underlined the last entry twice. Then she set the notebook down, walked to the windowsill, lifted the framed photograph for the first time in 8 months, and looked at it for 9 seconds before she set it back down, face down. Her husband had been a chef. He had been her husband for 11 years and her business partner for 9. He had died at the start of a pandemic in a hospital where she had not been allowed to sit with him. And he had loved one dish above all other dishes she had ever made, and that dish had begun every single time with a smoked bone broth. She wrapped the gyuto. She put it back at the bottom of the tote. She did not look at the photograph again that week.
The tip pooling meeting happened on a Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. in the private dining room at the back of the restaurant, with the lights still half on from the previous night's service. The front-of-house director called all hourly staff to attend. The brigade arrived in their street clothes. The dishwasher came in jeans and a cardigan over a plain shirt, sat in the second row, and placed her notebook flat on her lap. The director stood at the front of the room with the same careful smile she had worn during wristband distribution. She told the assembled staff that the management team had completed a review of the tip pooling structure, that the review had been conducted in consultation with outside counsel, and that, effective the following Monday, the pool would be restructured to reflect the operational realities of a modern fine dining environment. There would be 3 tiers. Tier 1 would receive 60%, Tier 2 would receive 35%, Tier 3 would receive 5%. For purposes of this policy, Tier 3 is defined as back-of-house, non-guest-facing employees, dishwashers, prep cooks, porters. The new structure is designed to align with industry standards and to ensure that our guest front-of-house experience is appropriately incentivized. The policy is effective immediately upon notice. The room was very still. A barback at the end of the second row asked quietly whether dishwashers and prep cooks had been included in the previous pool. The director smiled the same careful smile and said that the previous pool had been an interim structure that had not been operationally sustainable, and that this revised structure would be in place going forward. She did not answer the question. The dishwasher did not raise her hand. She opened her notebook and wrote down in small, careful handwriting the date, the time, the names of the 4 management personnel present, the names of 3 witnesses sitting in her row, and 1 short sentence. She underlined the sentence. She closed the notebook. When the meeting broke, the brigade filed back through the dining room in silence. In the kitchen, the dishwasher walked the long way around the line to the break room and stopped in front of the corkboard. The State of Illinois labor poster was still pinned where it had been on her first day. Above it, in slightly faded ink, the Federal Department of Labor had printed a 1-page notice about the Fair Labor Standards Act. She did not take the notice down. She read it where it hung. She read it slowly. She read it twice. Then she walked back to her station and washed plates for the next 9 hours without speaking. That afternoon, between lunch service and dinner service, the sous chef stopped in front of her station holding a small piece of paper between 2 fingers. He had found it folded inside a stack of clean side towels at the dish lead station. He held it up at shoulder height where the line could see. "What is this? Whose handwriting is this? Is this somebody's love letter?" It was not a love letter. It was a tasting note. The dishwasher had written it that morning,
in pencil on the back of a torn produce invoice. The note described a single dish, a smoked bone broth finished with charred allium oil and a tableside pour of toasted barley milk, served with a small bone marrow dumpling and a quenelle of fermented black radish. 12 lines. 3 of them were temperature notes. 2 of them were salt ratios. One of them was in the margin, in even smaller handwriting, and said simply, "For Sam." The sous chef read the first 9 lines aloud in a tone that the brigade understood was an invitation to laugh. He skipped the line in the margin. He did not understand it. He folded the paper, set it on the rim of the dishwasher sink, and rested 2 fingers on top of it. Tasting notes from a dishwasher. Cute. There is a procedure in this kitchen. There is a procedure for how new dishes get developed in this kitchen. The procedure does not start at the dish pit. Are we clear on procedure? The dishwasher did not look up. She slid the paper out from under his fingers, refolded it into quarters, and tucked it into the front pocket of her apron without breaking the rhythm of her hands at the sink. Crystal clear, chef. She did not say it warmly. She did not say it sharply. She said it the way a hostess at a state dinner answers a question from a guest she has decided not to remember. The sous chef stood at her station for another 5 seconds, decided that he had won something, and walked away. The line cook nearest the dish station, a young man named Fletcher Reed, who had been at Lumière for 6 months and had not made it onto the line until 2 weeks ago, watched the entire exchange and said nothing. He would say something 3 weeks later. He would say it in writing. He would say it in a text message to the sous chef that he would later swear on oath he had not sent. At 3 in the morning, back at the folding table in Pilsen, the dishwasher opened her notebook. She wrote down the word procedure. She underlined it. She closed the notebook. She lifted the photograph from the windowsill, turned it face up for 14 seconds this time, and turned it back down. Then she sat in the dark with the wrapped gyuto in front of her and did not move for almost an hour. The retaliation came in small, careful pieces. None of it was loud. None of it was actionable on its own. All of it accumulated. On the Monday after the tip pool meeting, the front-of-house director updated the break room schedule. The new schedule listed 30-minute meal breaks for the line cooks and the prep team, 20-minute breaks for the porters, and 15-minute breaks for the dishwashers. The dishwasher took a photograph of the schedule on her phone before she clocked in. She did not send the photograph anywhere. She did not show it to anyone. She saved it to a folder on her phone called Receipts, which she had created on her second day of employment and had not yet opened in front of another human being. The sous chef came to her station on Tuesday with a 6-quart container of veal stock and a complaint that the stock had been seasoned incorrectly by someone on prep, that no one would admit to having seasoned it, and that since the dishwasher was in the kitchen at the time, she was going to fix it. He set the container on the corner of her sink. He told her that she had until family meal at 4:45. He left. The veal stock had not been seasoned by anyone on prep. The dishwasher knew this within 40 seconds of tasting it, because the salinity was almost perfect. There was, however, exactly the amount of black pepper in it that a sous chef adds at the end of a service when he is angry, and exactly the amount of acid that the same sous chef adds at the start of a shift when he is restless. She rebuilt the seasoning the way her late husband had taught her to rebuild a broken hollandaise once on a Sunday morning in the 2nd year of their marriage, patiently, in small portions, with a clean spoon between each taste. She had the container back on the cold side of the line at 4:40. The sous chef tasted it at 4:41. He set the spoon down without speaking. He walked away. The line cook nearest the dish station, Fletcher Reed, was the next problem. He arrived for his Wednesday afternoon shift at 1:30 p.m., 15 minutes early, and stood in front of the time clock for the better part of 2 minutes. The dishwasher saw him from the dish pit. She did not stop washing plates. She did not say anything. She watched. He did something to the back of the clock, opened a small panel, adjusted a dial, closed the panel, and then he turned and walked through the kitchen with both hands in his pockets, whistling a song no one in the kitchen recognized. She waited. She finished the rack of glassware in front of her. She dried her hands on a clean towel. She walked to the time clock, pulled out her phone, took a photograph of the small label on the side of the unit, took a second photograph of the panel that he had touched, opened the panel herself, looked inside, closed it, and walked back to her station. She did not punch in at the time she had arrived. She punched in at the time the clock now showed, which was 8 minutes later than it had been when she walked into the kitchen. When she walked home that night, she added a third photograph to the receipts folder on her phone. She added a fourth one the next day, when the time clock was 11 minutes off again. She added a fifth one the day after that. By the end of the second week of retaliation, she had a sequence of photographs, a sequence of punch-in times, and a sequence of weather reports she had screenshotted from a city service website for the same days. She knew from her years in New York that a sequence of photographs is interesting. A sequence of photographs paired with a sequence of independent timestamps is evidence. She did not yet know whether she would use it. She knew only that she would have it. If you have ever watched a workplace try to make you small and chosen, instead, to make it traceable, share this one with someone who needs to see it. We are not done.
The immersion circulator failed on a Thursday during late prep. It was a heavy commercial unit, a thermocirculator and recirculating bath combined, used by the sous chef for the restaurant's signature short rib preparation, which spent 48 hours at 132 degrees in a heavy plastic bag, and which carried a 6-day prep schedule that had been bragged about in 3 separate magazine profiles. The unit was the most expensive piece of equipment in the kitchen that the dining room guests would never see. When it failed silently, not with an alarm, but with a slow drift in temperature that the sous chef noticed only when a probe thermometer came out of one of the bags reading 126. He muttered something into the back of his hand. He hit the side of the bath with the heel of his palm. He cycled the power 3 times. He muttered the same thing again. He opened the unit's control panel. He stared at it the way a person stares at a foreign language. He closed the panel. He stared at it some more. The head chef was in the office on a call. The sous chef did not want to interrupt him. The line was 40 minutes from open. The dish pit lead, who had walked past 3 times by now, finally stopped, looked at the circulator, looked at the sous chef, looked at the dishwasher who had been quietly drying a stack of small plates the whole time, and said one word, "Naomi." The sous chef turned his head. The dishwasher set the towel down. She walked the length of the line in clean, unhurried steps, stopped in front of the bath, looked at the unit for 9 seconds without touching it, and then crouched. Power still on. Display is reading temperature, just won't hold it. May I? She did not wait for permission. She unplugged the unit at the wall, counted to 30 under her breath, plugged it back in, opened the back access panel with the small flathead from her apron pocket, the apron pocket where the broth-stained index card had not yet appeared, but where even then 3 other small index cards already lived, pressed a reset toggle that the sous chef had not known existed, closed the panel, set the bath to 133, watched the display climb for 40 seconds, watched it hold, stood back up, picked up her towel, and walked back to the dish pit. The sous chef did not thank her. He did not look at her. He did not say her name. He said instead, to no one in particular, and to the line in general, "Lucky guess." She did not answer him. The dish pit lead, who had not spoken in the kitchen all week except to call out plate counts during service, watched her walk back to her station, watched her start the next rack of glassware, and tipped his chin at her one time.
It was the closest thing to a salute she would receive from anyone at Lumière for another month and a half. She did not return it. She did not need to. The brigade noticed. Not all of them, not loudly, but the second cold line cook, a woman named Iris Vance, who had been in the kitchen for almost 3 years and who did not like the sous chef but had not yet figured out how to say so, looked across the line at the dishwasher and held the look for almost a full second. Iris did not say anything that afternoon. She did, however, the following morning, find the dishwasher in the break room and ask her very quietly whether she had been a cook before. The dishwasher answered very quietly that she had cooked. She waited. There was no more. By the end of that week, 3 of the line cooks had stopped calling her the new dish girl. The sous chef and the head chef had not changed anything about how they spoke to her. The front-of-house director continued to update wristband colors and break schedules and to smile at the brigade the way she had smiled at them on the first day. But something inside the dish station had shifted very slightly, the way a knife edge shifts when you finally find the angle on a stone. The dishwasher did not exploit it. She did not press it. She washed plates. She took photographs. She wrote things down. She added a 4th and a 5th index card to the front pocket of her apron, where the broth-stained one would, 3 weeks from then, also live. And every night on the walk home, she ran the same calculation in her head: what she had seen, what she had recorded, what she could prove, and what she would need to prove before she did anything with any of it. She had been a chef. Patience was the first thing chefs learned, and the last thing they lost.
The head chef had not until then spoken directly to her. He had walked past her station 4 times a day for 9 weeks, and he had not used her name once. That changed on a Friday in the middle of October, 20 minutes into the dinner pre-service walk, when he stopped at the dish pit with his arms crossed and looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of machinery he has been told is more expensive than it should be. "Auntie, I need you to understand something. This is a kitchen, not a community center. Not your auntie's kitchen, not wherever it is you learn to stack dishes. If I hear that you have been telling my line cooks how to fix my equipment one more time, you and I are going to have a very different conversation. Are we tracking, Auntie?" She did not look up. She lifted a clean rack of saucers out of the high-temperature sanitizer with both hands and set them on the drying counter. She straightened. She wiped her hands on the towel at her waist. She looked at him then, briefly, the way a woman looks at a stranger who had stepped on her foot in an elevator. "My name is Naomi, chef." "I did not ask what your name was, Auntie." He held her eyes for 2 seconds. He smiled with the corner of his mouth. He walked away. He brushed his shoulder against the side of the stock pot she had carried over to the rinse station 10 minutes earlier. Brushed it, not hard, not in a way that anyone watching from the line would have called a shove, but exactly hard enough that the pot rocked on its base and the broth inside it sloshed up against the rim. He did not stop walking. He did not look back. He turned the corner past the expo window and called out a salt line adjustment to the garde-manger as if the previous 40 seconds had not occurred. She steadied the pot. She returned to the dish pit. She wrote 4 sentences in her notebook on the walk home that night. The paring knife appeared in her locker the next afternoon. It was a 4-inch paring knife with a black plastic handle, the standard issue from the restaurant's prep kit, the kind that lived in the open drawer at the end of the cold line that any cook in the kitchen could have lifted in under 3 seconds. She found it on top of her folded sweater when she opened the locker at 1:15 p.m., 12 minutes before her shift was scheduled to begin. She looked at it for a long count. She did not touch it. She closed the locker. She walked through the kitchen to the front-of-house director's office. "Miss Sterling, there is a 4-inch knife in my locker. I did not put it there. I'm letting you know before service starts so that we do not have a misunderstanding about it later." The director smiled the careful smile. She thanked her for the heads up.
She said that she would have someone take a look. She did not get up from her desk. 20 minutes later, the general manager walked the kitchen with a clipboard. The general manager was a woman in her early 50s named Delilah Marsh. She had been in hospitality for almost 30 decades, had opened 5 restaurants in 3 cities, and had been hired at Lumière 6 weeks before the restaurant's grand opening because the silent investor wanted, in her own words, an experienced adult in the building. She did not, as a rule, walk the kitchen during service. She walked it that afternoon. She walked it slowly. She stopped at the dish station, and she opened the locker labeled with N. Ellis at the top, and lifted the paring knife out of it with a clean dish towel, and set it at shoulder height. This is a kitchen-issue paring knife. It does not belong in a dishwasher's locker. Miss Ellis, would you like to explain how this got here? The dishwasher stood with her hands flat at her sides. She did not raise her voice. She did not soften it. I cannot explain it. I do not have access to the prep drawer at the end of the cold line. I have never had access to it. The dish pit lead can confirm that. The kitchen camera at the back line corner will confirm that. My locker has been opened by someone other than me sometime in the last 90 minutes, and I would like the security footage from the break room hallway pulled for that window. The general manager held her eyes for a beat. She set the paring knife down. She made a note on her clipboard. She did not pull the security footage. She told the dishwasher that the matter would be reviewed. She walked away. The line cook nearest the dish station, Fletcher Reed, the same line cook who had 6 weeks ago watched the sous chef mock a piece of paper and said nothing, stood with his hands in his apron pocket and did not meet her eyes once during the entire exchange. That afternoon, at 5:15 p.m., the truffle vendor arrived through the back service door with a small wooden case. He was an older gentleman from a small importer in Rosemont, 62 years old, who had been delivering to her late husband's restaurant in New York before that restaurant had closed. He set the case down on the prep counter and looked across the kitchen to the dish station and broke into a wide, unforced smile. The kind of smile that a man wears when he has unexpectedly run into a friend in the middle of a city he had not expected to find them in. Miss Ellis, it is good to see you. We were so sorry to hear about. She looked up. She held her eyes. She smiled, small, just the corners. She shook her head once, slowly. It is just Naomi here. Good to see you, Mr. Calder. The chef will be right out for the truffles. The vendor blinked once. He understood. He nodded. He set the case where the sous chef would find it. He left. The sous chef came out 40 seconds later and inspected the truffles in silence. He did not ask the dishwasher how the vendor knew her name. He had not been close enough to hear it. The dish pit lead, who had been 4 feet away, had heard it. He looked at her once. He went back to his pans. She walked home that night through a slow, late October rain, her tote slung over her shoulder, her apron in a plastic bag inside the tote. She did not run. She did not hurry. She unlocked the door of the walk-up in Pilsen, climbed the stairs, sat down at the folding table, and opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote one sentence at the top of the page. She underlined it. This week, Saturday, service. She knew what was coming. She had seen the rhythm of it for 10 weeks. The head chef was going to do something on Saturday in front of the brigade that he would not be able to walk back. He always did. The only question was whether she was ready for it. She was ready for it.
Saturday afternoon at Lumière looked from the outside the way it always looked. The black sedan pulled into the alley at 4. The head chef came through the back door with his knife roll under his arm. The radio in the dry storage corner played the same forgettable instrumental loop. The front-of-house director walked the dining room with her color-coded clipboard. The sous chef stood at the cold line and tapped his French notebook against the corner of his station 3 times, the way a man taps a hand of cards he has decided is unbeatable. The dishwasher arrived at 1:45 p.m. She did not punch in until the clock read 2 p.m. that day, and she had stopped fighting it on the clock and had started fighting it in photographs. She washed glassware for the first hour. She washed sheet pans for the second. At 3:15, on her unpaid 15-minute break, she stood in front of the single back burner at the far end of the cold line, lit it, set a 12-quart stockpot on it, and began to build a broth out of the bone scraps that had been pulled from a roast that morning and would otherwise have gone into the slop bin. She did this on her own time. She did this with the dish pit lead's quiet knowledge. She did this the way her husband had taught her to do it, with cold water and patience and a long, slow build. She left the pot on a low simmer with the dish pit lead watching it for her, walked back to the dish station, and started the late afternoon glassware service. At 4 o'clock, the pot was deep and dark and quiet. At 4:30, it had reduced by a third. At 5 o'clock, she pulled the bones out, strained the broth twice through a fine sieve, returned the broth to the pot, set it on the back burner, and turned the heat low. At 5:15, she added a small spoonful of charred allium oil and a pinch of toasted coriander seed. At 5:30, she stepped back to the dish pit and washed 3 racks of plates. At 5:47 p.m., the head chef walked the long way down the line. He had been at the pass. He had been on a phone call. He had been watching the dish pit lead bring a small cup of broth back to the cold line corner and offer it without speaking to Iris Vance, the same Iris Vance who had asked the dishwasher a quiet question in the break room 3 weeks earlier. Iris had taken the cup. She had tasted it. She had closed her eyes for half a second. She had said very quietly, "That is the best thing I have tasted in this kitchen." The dish pit lead had said nothing. He had carried the empty cup back to the dish station. He had set it down on the rim of the sink, next to the dishwasher's right hand. He had walked away. The head chef had been at the pass for all of that. He had heard the line, "The best thing I have tasted in this kitchen," travel down the line, the way a single sentence travels down a line when a kitchen is bored and tense and looking for something to bite. He set down his phone. He pushed off the pass with both hands. He walked the length of the line. He did not stop at the cold station. He did not stop at the sous chef's station. He stopped at the back burner. He lifted the stockpot with both hands. He turned slowly and walked it past every cook and past the expo window and past the dish pit lead and all the way to the dish pit at the back wall. And he stood in front of the dishwasher, and he held the pot at chest height, and he said the sentence that had opened this story. "Hands down, knives down, step off the line. I want every single one of you watching when this hits the bin." He turned the pot over. The broth came out in one long, heavy ribbon. It hit the bottom of the black slop bin in a wave. It splashed up the inside of the bin and ran down. The kitchen smelled for 90 seconds of 9 hours of slow reduction. The brigade did not laugh at first. The sous chef did. He laughed once, sharp, the way a man laughs at a small private joke he has been keeping. The 2 cooks closest to him laughed, because the 2 cooks closest to him were paid to laugh. The rest of the brigade did not laugh. Smell that, brigade? That is what garbage smells like. Burnt bone, old vegetables, bad judgment. Whoever taught her to cook trash. We do not cook trash at this restaurant. We do not let dishwashers cook anything at this restaurant. The next person who hands her a flame is fired. Are we tracking? The brigade did not answer. The brigade had learned by then that answering was not always the right move. She set down the spray hose. She did not look at him. She wiped her hands on the towel at her waist. She reached into the front pocket of her apron with 2 fingers, slid the broth-stained index card out of the pocket where she had quietly slipped it that afternoon when she had pulled the recipe out to double-check the salt, looked at it for half a second, and slid it back into the same pocket. She picked up the spray hose. She washed down the slop bin until the smell was gone. She started the next rack of plates. The head chef set the empty pot on the counter at the back of the dish station with a heavy clatter. He walked back to the line. He clapped his hands twice, sharp, like a man calling a class to order. He told the brigade that they had 90 seconds before doors opened. He told them that the family meal portion of the day was over. He told them that real cooks would be doing real work for the next 5 hours. He walked back to the pass. The dish pit lead, 4 feet from the dishwasher, did not move. He watched her hands at the sink. He watched her face. He saw something in it that he had seen before in his life, twice in 2 cities, in 2 kitchens, both times in older women who had once been somebody and become quiet for a long time. He did not say anything. He turned back to his pans. She worked through dinner service. She washed 1,800 plates between 6 and 11:30. She did not look at the head chef. She did not speak unless spoken to. At 11:45 p.m., she clocked out at the time the clock said she had clocked out, took a photograph of the timestamp, walked through the back service door into the alley, and stood under the eaves for 40 seconds while a slow rain came down over the dumpsters and the empty wine crates. She did not cry. She had not cried in 8 months. She had stopped being able to. She walked the 4 blocks east. She took the Pink Line south. She got off at 18th Street. She climbed the stairs of the walk-up. She sat down at the folding table in Pilsen at 1:48 a.m. on a Sunday morning in late October, and she laid the contents of her tote out in front of her in 3 neat rows. 11 weeks of photographs, 6 pages of handwritten notes, 3 voice memos saved as audio files, 4 index cards from the front pocket of her apron, 1 photograph of a state of Illinois labor poster, 1 photograph of a Federal Department of Labor notice, 1 folded copy of the tip pool restructuring memo, dated, signed, on Lumière letterhead, 1 screen capture of the front of House Director's smile in a public relations photograph that appeared in a magazine the previous spring. And at the center of the table, the small broth-stained index card with the recipe written in her own handwriting, 12 lines long, 3 of them temperature notes, 2 of them salt ratios, and 1 of them, in the margin, in smaller letters than the rest, the words that had not changed in 3 years. For Sam. She picked up her phone, she opened the receipts folder, and she started, for the first time, to put everything in order. If this is the part where you would have walked away, share this one with someone who did not get to walk away. We are not finished. Part 2 is where she stops being patient.
By 6 a.m. on Sunday, the folding table in Pilsen looked like the evidence intake at a federal prosecutor's office. She had not slept. She had organized 11 weeks of photographs into a single document, 84 pages, each page labeled with date, time, weather, and witness if known. She had transcribed the 3 voice memos word for word with timestamps in the margin. She had numbered the 4 index cards in chronological order and noted on the back of each one the prep cycle in which it had been written. She had drafted, at the top of a clean sheet, the heading she had not allowed herself to type for 8 months, to the Illinois Department of Labor, Field Office, Chicago, re Lumière LLC, wage and hour violations, under 820 ILCS 115. She did not file the complaint online. She knew from the years before what the difference was between an online intake and a walk-in.
She put on a long, dark coat over the same plain shirt she had worn for the meeting that had stripped her tip share. She took the pink line back into the loop. She walked the 3 blocks east to the field office at 8:45 a.m. on Monday morning. She did not call her shift in sick. She did not call in at all. She stood at the public counter with a paper folder under her arm and a small canvas tote at her feet, and she waited her turn the way the people in front of her had waited theirs. The investigator who took her intake was a woman in her late 40s named Rachel Faulkner. She had been at IDOL for 16 years. She had built her career on small, accumulated cases that nobody else in the office wanted, and she had built her reputation on what she did with those cases once she had them. She took the folder, she set it on the desk, she opened it. She read for 9 minutes without looking up. When she finally did look up, she did not smile. She said one sentence, "This is a complete file." "It is." "How long have you been documenting?" 11 weeks. "And you came to us before you spoke to a lawyer?" "I'm speaking to a lawyer this afternoon. I wanted the wage record on file first." Rachel Faulkner held her eyes for a moment longer than was strictly procedural. Then she opened a fresh case file. She filled in the name at the top, N. Ellis, and the employer's registered name and address. She read aloud for the recording that was always running at her desk the relevant language from 820 ILCS 115, Section 9. Every employer shall pay every employee all wages earned during the semi-monthly pay period no later than 13 days after the end of that pay period. Every employer shall make and keep payroll records as prescribed. Naomi nodded once. Rachel Faulkner read the next section. She read every section in order, the way a person reads the conditions on a contract she is about to sign, line by line, until Naomi had been told on the record exactly what the law said. She did not skip the part about retaliation. She did not skip the part about willful violations. She did not skip the part that read, "Any employee not timely paid wages shall be entitled to recover such amount as damages, together with costs and reasonable attorney's fees." When she was done, she set the file down. She slid a card across the desk. "This case will take time. Position statement from the employer in 30 days. Audit will take 90 days minimum, likely longer given the size of this file. Have you been retaliated against since you started documenting?" "Yes." "You will be again. Do you intend to keep working there?" "Until you tell me not to." Rachel Faulkner wrote that down. She did not argue. She handed Naomi a second card with the regional EEOC office on it. She said in a tone that was neither warm nor cold that she expected to be back in touch within the week. She wished her a quiet shift. Naomi took the cards. She walked back out into the loop. She did not look at her phone until she had reached the Pink Line platform, at which point she opened it once, took a single photograph of the case file number on Rachel Faulkner's card, saved it to the receipts folder, and put the phone away. That afternoon at the EEOC regional office, she met a staff attorney named Ezra Holt.
Ezra Holt was 34, federal civil rights bar, 3 years at the regional office, with a particular file cabinet inside his head for hospitality cases. He read her materials for 35 minutes. He asked 4 questions. He did not ask why she had taken a job below her last position. He did not ask whether she had documented from day one. He did not ask why she had not gone to the press. The answers to all 3 of those questions were already in the folder. "We are within the 300-day window for every act in this file. We will file a charge today under Title VII, Section 2000E-2, disparate treatment, hostile work environment, and retaliation, and a concurrent charge under the Illinois Human Rights Act, 775 ILCS 5, Section 2-102. The locker incident, the wristband classification, the auntie line, the public humiliation at the dish pit, all of it is on the charge. We file under N. Ellis until you tell me otherwise." Use N. Ellis. Understood. Do you want to stay at the restaurant during the investigation? Most of my clients do not. I am staying. He nodded. He did not argue. He filed the charge that afternoon. The EEOC clock began running. The notice would reach Lumière's registered agent within 10 business days. The position statement would be due in 30. Naomi walked the 4 blocks back to the Pink Line, took the train south, slept for 6 hours in the apartment in Pilsen, and clocked in for her Tuesday shift at 1:53 p.m., which was the time the clock read when she walked in the door at 1:38 p.m. She did not flag the discrepancy. She photographed the clock. She washed plates. The notice arrived at Lumière on a Thursday morning, 11 days after she had filed. By that afternoon, the head chef was in the office with the general manager and a man in a gray suit she had not seen in the kitchen before. The conference room door was closed for 2 hours. When it opened, the head chef walked the line without speaking. The sous chef walked behind him at exactly 2 paces. The front-of-house director did not come into the kitchen for the rest of the day. Naomi washed plates. 2 days later, she walked past the swinging door between the kitchen and the back service hallway with her phone in the front pocket of her apron, and the front-of-house director's voice came through the door clearly enough that the recording she had quietly started 30 seconds earlier captured every word. We coordinate on the story before anyone speaks to the investigator. The locker situation was a one-time prep team error. The tip pool restructuring was a documented operational decision in consultation with counsel. The auntie thing was a colloquial nickname used affectionately on the line. Nobody speaks to her about any of this. Nobody. The recording was 41 seconds long. She did not listen back to it that night. She did not need to. She uploaded it to 2 encrypted folders. She forwarded one copy to Ezra Holt. She added the second to the file Rachel Faulkner now had on her desk in the field office in the Loop. She washed plates for 3 more weeks. The position statement from Lumière arrived on the 30th day. It was 46 pages long. It used the phrase industry standard 11 times and the phrase kitchen culture 7. Ezra Holt read the entire document in one sitting at his desk, made 19 margin notes, and called Naomi at 9:47 p.m. that evening. We are going to mediation. If you've ever held a receipt for a year longer than the people who hurt you thought you would, hit subscribe and stay with this one. The next part is what she came for.
The joint mediation was set on a Thursday in the second week of December at the EEOC regional office on West Madison. The conference room was small, beige, with a long oak table and 12 plain chairs. The Lumière legal team arrived at 10:30 a.m. with the general manager, the front-of-house director, and one outside counsel from a downtown firm. They had been told the complainant was a back-of-house employee with a wage and discrimination claim. They had prepared a settlement offer of $17,000, contingent on a standard non-disclosure agreement. They believed they would be out of the room by lunch. Naomi arrived at 10:45 a.m. with Ezra Holt and one paralegal. She wore the same long, dark coat. She carried the same small canvas tote. The Lumière team did not, at first, recognize her. The general manager looked at the front-of-house director with a small, confused tilt of the head. The front-of-house director did not look back. She had recognized her in the first half-second. The mediator opened the session at 11 a.m. He read the procedural rules. He invited Ezra Holt to make a brief opening on behalf of the complainant. Ezra Holt did not make a brief opening. He looked at Naomi. He nodded once, then he sat back down. She set the tote on the table. She opened it. She took out the wrapped object she had carried in the bottom of the tote every working day for 11 weeks. She unfolded the dark blue cloth one corner at a time. She lifted the 8-inch gyuto out of the cloth. She set it on the table beside her, blade pointed away from everyone in the room, the way a witness sets down a piece of evidence she will not be using as a weapon. Then she reached back into the tote and slid 3 documents across the table to the mediator and to the Lumière outside counsel, in the same clean, unhurried motion she had used 11 weeks ago to slide a clean rack of saucers onto a drying counter. The first document was a James Beard Foundation Medallion Certificate, dated May 2019, awarded to the executive chef and co-owner of a restaurant called Sable and Smoke in New York City. The second was a state of New York filing for the same restaurant, listing the executive chef and co-owner of record. The third was a death certificate, dated March 2021, for one Samuel David Ellis, also of New York City. The name on all 3 documents was the same. My name is Naomi Ellis. I was the executive chef and co-owner of Sable and Smoke. We held a James Beard Award. My husband and business partner died at the start of the pandemic. The restaurant closed within the month. I took a position as a dishwasher at Lumière on August 22nd of this year to make a decision about whether I wanted to cook again. That decision has been made. I would like to begin with the wage records. The room did not breathe. The Lumière outside counsel reached for his glass of water. He did not drink from it. The general manager's left hand went flat on the table and stayed there. The front-of-house director closed her eyes for 1 full second and then opened them. Ezra Holt placed the file at the center of the table. He read, in order, exactly the receipts she had spent 11 weeks collecting. He read the time clock photographs with their independent weather service timestamps showing 8, 11, and 14-minute discrepancies on 3 separate dates. He read the tip pool restructuring memo verbatim, citing 29 U.S.C. Section 203M. He read the voice memo transcript from behind the swinging door, the word coordinate, the phrase used affectionately on the line, the order that nobody speaks to her. He read the locker incident timeline with the dish pit lead's witness statement attached, taken on a Saturday afternoon in November, and signed. He read the truffle vendor witness statement from Mr. Calder of Rosemont, signed and notarized. He read the Federal Department of Labor poster language. He read the State of Illinois Human Rights Act, Section 2-102. He read the head chef's exact words on the night of the soup, transcribed from a kitchen angle the Lumière team had not yet known they had been served a preservation letter for. The phrase, "whoever taught her to cook trash," hung in the air for a long count. Naomi did not speak again until Ezra Holt was finished. When he was finished, she looked across the table at the general manager. "Miss Marsh, you told me on a Saturday afternoon that the matter would be reviewed. The matter has now been reviewed. I would like to hear from your counsel." The Lumière outside counsel asked for a recess. The mediator granted 45 minutes. The Lumière team did not return at the end of the 45 minutes. They returned 3 hours later, after a call to the silent investor that had not gone the way they had hoped. The settlement on the wage claim alone, before any other consideration, came in at $418,000, plus reinstatement of all back-of-house tip eligibility and full back pay for every misclassified employee since opening day. The discrimination and retaliation claims under Title VII and the Illinois Human Rights Act were carved out for a separate cause finding the EEOC would issue 91 days later. The non-disclosure carve-out that Ezra Holt had drafted before they walked in allowed Naomi to speak publicly about the wage and discrimination findings in any venue she chose. She did not sign anything that day. She read the draft overnight. She signed it the next morning at 9 a.m., with one revision to the recitals that the Lumière outside counsel did not contest. By that afternoon, the silent investor had pulled the entire backing of the restaurant. By that evening, the head chef had been placed on indefinite hiatus by his publicists.
By the following Monday, the Michelin Guide had quietly removed Lumière from consideration.
The cascade unfolded across the late winter and the early spring the way these cases unfold when the receipts are clean enough. The IDOL issued its formal wage citation in the third week of January, assessing back pay for 14 misclassified back-of-house employees over the restaurant's full operating period. The number was larger than the public knew. The EEOC cause finding came down on a Tuesday in mid-February, citing disparate treatment, hostile work environment, and retaliation under Title VII and concurrent violations under the Illinois Human Rights Act. The civil settlement on the discrimination claims followed in March, with the same non-disclosure carve-out and with a public statement that Lumière's legal team had attempted to redraft 6 times and that Ezra Holt had returned 6 times unchanged. The Food Network suspended the head chef's development deal on the morning the EEOC finding hit the press. The James Beard Foundation placed him on advisory probation by the end of the same week, a rare disciplinary step the foundation had taken only twice in the previous decade. The front-of-house director resigned by letter on the last Friday of February with what her publicist called a strong desire to spend more time with family. The general manager retired the following week, citing a long-planned transition. The sous chef returned to France in March. The line cook who had moved the time clock and planted the paring knife, Fletcher Reed, filed a union grievance over his terms of separation, was advised by counsel to withdraw it, and did. The dish pit lead from Honduras gave a single on-the-record interview to a local food reporter, said 3 sentences, and refused to be paid for them. Iris Vance, the second cold line cook who had once tasted a cup of broth and closed her eyes for half a second, sent Naomi a one-line email that read only, "Thank you for cooking again." Naomi did not reply for 2 weeks. When she did, she replied with 3 words, "Come work with me." Lumière closed its doors on the last day of March. The lease was not renewed. The space sat empty for the rest of the spring, with a paper notice in the window that read, "Under new management, opening soon." The new management was never named. The Silent Investors Holding Company filed a quiet reorganization that nobody outside of 2 financial publications noticed. The Illinois Attorney General's office in early April announced a hospitality industry wage compliance sweep covering 54 restaurants in the Chicago metropolitan area, including 3 operated by the same silent investor. The press release used the phrase preliminary findings 4 times. It did not name Naomi Ellis. It did not need to. The reporters who covered the sweep all knew. No one went to jail. The head chef was not criminally charged. The general manager was not criminally charged. The line cook who had moved the clock was not criminally charged. The work that had been done was administrative. The wages that had been recovered were paid. The system, in its slow, expensive way, had moved exactly as far as the system was ever going to move on a case like this, and not a single inch farther. Naomi Ellis had known that from the morning she walked into the IDOL field office with a folder under her arm. She had not been after jail. She had been after the record. The record now existed. The record now had her name on it.
6 months after the mediation, on a hot Tuesday morning in the third week of June, a small restaurant opened in the West Loop neighborhood of Chicago. 12 seats, 1 service per night. A handwritten menu that changed every Sunday. The restaurant was called Sable. The chef and owner, listed on the city business filings and on a small brass plate beside the door, was Naomi Ellis. The signature dish on the opening night menu was a single bowl of smoked bone consommé, finished with a charred allium oil and a tableside pour of toasted barley milk, served with a small bone marrow dumpling and a quenelle of fermented black radish. 12 lines on a card, 3 of them temperature notes, 2 of them salt ratios. The recipe had been written originally in pencil on the back of a torn produce invoice in the break room of another restaurant in the city on a morning in late August, almost 10 months earlier. The woman who had written it had not been allowed to cook it then. The chef who had thrown it into a slop bin had not understood then what he had been throwing away. She understood now. The city understood now. The dish pit lead from Lumière, the quiet older man from Honduras, was on the pass at Sable on opening night, in his own pressed whites, with his own name embroidered above the pocket, for the first time in his career. Iris Vance, the second cold line cook who had once closed her eyes for a half-second over a paper cup, was on the cold station. Mr. Calder of Rosemont delivered the first crate of truffles through the front door, which he had insisted on because the back service door of the restaurant, he had said, was for new beginnings only on opening night. He hugged her in the doorway. He wept a little. She did not. She had stopped being able to. In the small kitchen at the back of the room, on a shelf above the line that the guests in the dining room would never see, a framed photograph sat face up for the first time in 3 years. In the photograph, 2 people stood in front of a restaurant that no longer existed, in a city she no longer lived in, holding a small dish between them. The man in the photograph had been gone for 39 months. The woman in the photograph had spent 13 of those months underground, 8 of them mourning, and 11 of them washing plates. The photograph had been turned face down for almost all of it. It was face up now. It was going to stay face up. The Midwest Michelin Guide announcement came in early October. The guide that year added 1 new star in the city of Chicago, and the new star went to a restaurant called Sable in the West Loop, with 12 seats and 1 service per night. The citation, as printed in the guide, ran 4 sentences. The 3rd sentence read, "A smoked bone consommé that drinks like a memory, finished tableside with a precision that belongs to a chef who has been cooking quietly for far longer than this dining room has been open." Naomi Ellis read that sentence once in the kitchen at the back of the room on a Tuesday morning at 6:15 a.m. with the dish pit lead from Honduras standing beside her at the pass and Iris Vance prepping behind them at the cold station. She read it once. She did not read it twice. She set the guide down on the counter, picked up the small broth-stained index card she still carried in the front pocket of her apron, looked at the line in the margin for a half-second, and slid the card back into the same pocket. For Sam. She turned to the line. The line was full. The line was hers.
The phone in the back office of Sable rang on a Wednesday morning in late October, 3 weeks after the star. It was Rachel Faulkner. She was no longer at IDOL. She had taken a position with the Illinois Attorney General's office in September on the hospitality industry sweep. She had not told anyone in the press. She had not made a public statement. She had simply moved offices, and the sweep had widened. And the financial publications that had quietly covered the silent investors' reorganization in the spring had begun in October to cover it less quietly. Rachel Faulkner did not call to congratulate her on the star. She called for 2 reasons. The first reason was a single email recovered through subpoena from the silent investors' secondary holding company, dated 4 days before the soup had been dumped into the slop bin. The body of the email had been redacted on production by the silent investors' outside counsel, who claimed privilege over a sentence the courts had not yet ruled on. What had not been redacted was the subject line, the sender, the recipient, and 7 words from the middle of the second paragraph. The sender was the silent investor. The recipient was the front-of-house director. The 7 words in order were, "Keep her quiet about the until announcement," with 1 word redacted between about and the, and 1 word redacted between the and until. The redacted words were the only words in the sentence that mattered. Nobody outside the investor's legal team yet knew what they were.
The second reason was a 10-minute gap in the kitchen camera footage from Lumière on the Saturday night the soup had been dumped. The footage from every other camera in the restaurant on that night had been preserved and produced. The camera covering the back corner of the line, the one whose angle would have shown the dish pit and the back burner and the head chef's full walk across the kitchen with a stock pot in his hands, had not produced anything between 5:43 p.m. and 5:53 p.m. The gap had been flagged by the forensic vendor. The vendor's preliminary report described the gap as inconsistent with the recording schedule. The investigation into the gap was ongoing. Naomi listened to all of it without interrupting. She thanked Rachel Faulkner. She set the phone down. She walked out of the back office, through the prep area, past the cold station where Iris Vance was scoring a length of fermented black radish, past the pass where the dish pit lead was tasting a base broth with a clean spoon, and into the dining room at the front of the small restaurant. The light through the window was October light, low and clean, falling across 12 empty chairs that would be full in 9 hours. She walked to the corner of the room. She sat at the small chef's table where she ate her staff meal every night. She opened the canvas tote at her feet and lifted out the gyuto, still wrapped in the dark blue cloth. She had carried it every working day at 11 weeks at another restaurant, in another part of the city, in another life. She set the bundle on the table. She unfolded the cloth one corner at a time. She lifted the knife out of the cloth. She held it the way her husband had taught her to hold it, in the second year of their marriage, in another kitchen a long time ago. What she did next, the dining room did not see. The kitchen behind her did not see it either. Only the small framed photograph on the shelf above the line saw it, and the photograph had been waiting for it for 39 months. When she walked back into the kitchen 10 minutes later with the gyuto on her hip in a clean white sheath, the dish pit lead at the pass tipped his chin at her one time. She returned it. He called the next ticket. The brigade answered him together in the same clean, unhurried voice she had taught them to use. "Yes, chef." She picked up the next plate. The line was full. The line was hers. 2 words in an investor email were still redacted. 10 minutes of camera footage were still missing. Somewhere in the city, a head chef was waiting for a publicist to tell him when he could speak in public again. Somewhere else, an attorney general's office was widening a sweep. None of it was finished. All of it was on the record now, and the record had a name on it, and the name on the record had a knife on her hip and a brigade behind her and a star above her door. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who is still being asked to stack dishes. There is always another receipt being written somewhere. We will see you in the next one.